So what's your favorite thing so far about the game?
The game. My favorite thing so far about it. But specifically, it's hard. It's hard to boil it down to one thing because the game, like you already said, the game is so much of an ecosystem that thrives off of each element interacting with each other. Mm-hmm. That it's hard for there just to be one thing that I like the most because somebody
asked me the same question for Sunbreak, I would have a hard time.
Yeah, like every one thing interacts with other things. Like if there's a thunderstorm, like the game is coded and programmed in a way where like if there's a thunderstorm, lightning can strike, and lightning is attracted to metal objects. So regardless of whether or not Link is there and Link is interacting with it, lightning will strike a piece of metal, and if there happens to be grass around, it might light that grass on fire. And like all of that happens regardless of whether or not Link wants it to happen. And it happens sometimes to your benefit, sometimes to your detriment. The world like just fully exists and does shit without you needing to interact with it in many ways. And then you interact with it and make even more nonsense happen. So yeah, it's funny. Nick, our friend who's a game designer, we were playing and he was like, I do not envy the programmer that had to figure out how all of these things, all of this stuff that we can do and build has to interact with the water. He's like, the fucking physics engine and figuring out how the buoyancy and all this shit is going to interact with the water system in this game. He was like, fuck that. You couldn't pay me to do it. He was like, I cannot imagine how fucking frustrating it was to get all of that shit to work and interact correctly.
Yeah. That's actually very interesting. We take it for granted because we just play the games. We don't actually make them or program them. But you have a friend who we will have on this podcast one day, but he literally knows what goes into, making games and how difficult it can be to just physics. Like, right?
Yeah,
We're talking about physics in games. We take it for granted. I just, sometimes I am awed. I am awed by physics sometimes. And Monster Hunter Rise and Sunbreak, the whole wire bug mechanic is all physics based, and it's really cool what you can do with it.
Mm-hmm.
But I just kind of take it for granted. I'm like, I love this.
Yeah. Like, this is fun.
But I never thought about what goes into actually making things work.
Yeah.
Like what goes into the fact that you can wall climb and what walls are climbable, what walls aren't, and what your animals can traverse and what they can. All those things, how monsters interact with the terrain, especially the verticality of it all. There's a lot that goes into it.
You talking about climbing just reminded me of, I guess you could call this a quality of life change. It's weird. It's like a quality of life change, but it's also like a gameplay, like you have to do stuff for it. One thing people complained about a lot in Breath of the Wild was when it's raining, it's harder to climb. So like if you're climbing and it's raining, Link can like slip and he'll like slip down the hill that you're climbing. And people hated that. What they've added is just like new enemies, not enemies, new critters. Like there's a sticky lizard and a sticky frog that I found. I don't know if anything else does it, but basically if you like collect these, you like there's wildlife in the game that you can collect. There's like boars and bears and lizards and frogs and fireflies, and they all have an effect on things. And so like this specific breed of lizard and frog, you can use them to make elixirs, and you can make a sticky elixir, which essentially gives you a boost to where you won't slip if it's raining. So you can climb in the rain. And so basically it's one of those things that I think is really cool. Like for example, like in Monster Hunter, where you can make the game harder or easier on yourself depending on how much you prepare. If you prepare and ahead of a time while it's not raining, you decide to create some elixirs to make it so that you can climb in the rain. When it does rain, you're like, oh, cool. I'll drink this elixir and I can climb this mountain without being bothered by the rain. And I like that because this game is like kind of a survival game in a way. So being able to prepare and build yourself up to be able to tackle situations that will happen down the road is part of the gameplay loop.
Okay, that's all fair. I like the way it sounds. This sounds honestly so far very fun, very creative, very fantastic. It's giving me slight Fortnite vibes when I think about the building, how you can basically build things. You said put a propeller on some logs and put a little steering wheel on it. You got a raft.
All kinds of crazy shit. Because there was,
you know what?
There was rafts in Breath of the Wild, but they were kind of inconvenient to use. Like the rafts in Breath of the Wild just weren't convenient to use. And they really fixed that a lot in this game, where they just made you interacting with the world feel so much more cohesive. And Breath of the Wild was amazing. That's what's insane about this whole experience, is that Breath of the Wild was already a spectacular, magnificent game. And it's crazy.
The year it came out.
Yeah, it's crazy that this game makes that, like, it's hard. I imagine it'll be hard for me to go back and play Breath of the Wild. It being one of the best Zelda games ever made, it's going to be one of the hardest ones for me to replay now because, like, Tears of the Kingdom feels like an absolute straight upgrade, whereas, like, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom aren't necessarily upgrades to Ocarina of Time or Wind Waker or Twilight Princess because they are different experiences.
Yes.
Whereas this game directly competes with Breath of the Wild and feels like it's better in every way.
So I feel the same way about Monster Hunter Rise, Sunbreak, and Monster Hunter World. So Monster Hunter World is one of the best Monster Hunter games I've ever played. And when Rise came out, I was like, well, outside of specifically just graphics, Monster Hunter Rise is better than World in every way. And from like a straight up gameplay perspective, from a quality of life perspective, it is a straight up better game. The way you get around maps, so you don't have polymutes in Monster Hunter World, so you also don't have wire bugs. So literally going from place to place, there's a lot more running and climbing than there is like Rise and stuff. You have so many options for how you traverse the map, including like, and you can fast travel in Monster Hunter World as well. But again, some places you just gotta walk to and it takes, or climb to, and it takes a long time. And some people might like that, but after you do it, again, there's only like 5 maps in Monster Hunter World. So after you climb them a couple times, and I played that game, I have 1,300. And
you're hunting the same monster, 15, 20, 30 times.
Like if I had a wire bug or something to just quickly get to a spot, or you get fireballed off of the top of the ancient forest and you actually fall to the fucking bottom of it, that is obnoxious, okay? If the Rathalos doesn't follow you down and he's just roaring at the top and you know that it takes you an actual 3 minutes to get back up, like not exaggerating, I'm talking about actual 180 seconds to get back to the Rathalos, that is annoying.
Yeah.
I really appreciated Rise, and then Sunbreak was even bigger quality of life improvements there. And so it would make it hard for me right now. Like I know we talked about playing Monster Hunter World at some point, and while I would love that experience because we'd be playing it together and it'll be really fun, I often think about like the quality of life stuff that the direct upgrade that Rise and Sunbreak were to World. They just took World and essentially lowered the graphics because they had to for a game like that to work. They lowered the graphics, but then they increased so many other areas of it. And they also improved on just overall design in a lot of ways, because Monster Hunter World, one of the complaints that a lot of people had, and I'll get off this in a second, but a lot of the complaints that people had about Monster Hunter World was that Monster Hunter was known for having really cool looking weapons and really cool looking armor. And World tried to get so realistic at a point where the swords and shields and the armors, they just didn't look as fantastical as they do in Rise and as they did in the past before that.
Yeah, because they were trying to go with a more grounded, realistic look and approach.
Yes. And that made things look dull in some cases. Now, by the end of the game, like Velkhana, the Elder Dragon that eventually came out in Sunbreak recently while we weren't playing, and that's like the flagship of Iceborne. Velkhana, like when the armor and stuff like that for that monster came out, and when the title updates for that game came out for Iceborne, they started to make weapons and armor that were in that realm of like, this is that fantastical reason that people play Monster Hunter. These are crazy looking, futuristic looking, or just cartoonishly weird looking armor sets. They did that towards the end, but a lot of the beginning of the game, everything was very grounded looking, very like kind of washed out colors in a way, like because they wanted to look so real. And when I played Rise, I was like, man, it's so nice to just have that awesome pop of color back in the game, like that type of stuff. So while the graphics may have decreased in terms of like everything doesn't look super crazy realistic, it also just reminded me of the old school Monster games that I loved.
Like the graphics might not be as good, but the style, but you enjoy the style.
Correct. Correct. Yeah. So, but I get what you mean though. Going from Tears of the Kingdom back to Breath of the Wild will definitely be challenging because, like you said, it's a direct upgrade. It is basically the same map overall, and you're just playing it with everything's probably better. Like
it's literally just better. Like it's better in every conceivable way that I currently can think of, and Breath
of the Wild is still an amazing game despite that.
What's insane? Yeah, it's like Breath of the Wild's not bad. It was never bad, and before this game came out, it was the game that I could always go to and play just on any given day. I could just turn it on and like bring in the ambiance of that world. But then now like it's going to be hard for me to go back and do that because it's just this game is just an absolute direct upgrade to that. So it's just a weird experience because Zelda games have never really done that. There's never been a Zelda game that I really felt like was a pure upgrade to another one in most cases. But this is an example of that happening.
Yeah, I can't really think of a Zelda game that is quite like this, where it's a continuation of the story directly like this. Even, I know we talk about Ocarina of Time going into Majora's Mask. Like, technically, you know, it is a continuation.
It's a sequel,
like, timeline, but not in the same way.
Yeah, it's a sequel, but it's also a standalone game.
Yes,
like it just happens.
Feels like it too.
Yeah, it just happens to take place after another game, but nothing about Majora's Mask requires you to play Ocarina of Time at any point in time.
Yeah. Hey guys, if you like this clip, we have full video versions of our podcast episodes available on the IMNerd Patreon, as well as exclusive content.
If you'd like to listen to our full podcast episodes or find us on any other social media platforms, you can do so by clicking the link tree below.